Good morning to all our guests. I'm very happy to welcome all of you to the webinar, India-Latin America Dialogue, Expanding Horizons, which is co-hosted by the Center for African, Latin American, and Caribbean Studies at OP Jindal Global University, India, the Business Administration School of São Paulo at Getúlio Vargas Foundation in Brazil, and the Argentinian Council for International Relations, CARI, in Argentina. This dialogue happens at a critical point in time in which India expands its presence in LAC markets through grants, through lines of credits, through trade, foreign direct investments. The LAC region was the main recipient of the India UN Development Partnership Fund last year in 2021, with 38% of total funds, or 20 million, spanning 26 projects across the region. Now, also the third largest recipient of Indian lines of credit. Over 160 Indian companies are present in LAC, with total investments exceeding 30 billion US dollars. And India-LAC trade nearly doubled over the past decade from $22.8 billion in 2011 to $42.5 billion in 2021. But more than trade, LAC countries have also started to look towards India for diversification of their exports. And this has become even more evident after the pandemic and more recently with the war in Ukraine, which shifted supply chains harming Latin American economies. And as a result, several of our countries are now looking into ways to leverage India's technological know-how in industries like pharma and IT and many others. The region is also a critical supplier of minerals and hydrocarbons to India and a partner in global energy transition, with 12 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean participating in the Indian-led International Solar Alliance. India and Latin America also share perceptions about the global order and their role in it. In 2003, India and Brazil, along with South Africa, established the IPSA Forum. The two countries also stand together on the United Nations Security Council reform and the BRICS. Argentina, Brazil, India, and Mexico are also members of the G20, an intergovernmental grouping which India will chair for the first time next year in 2023. And with Brazil hosting both the G20 and the BRICS in 2024, the following year, and Argentina's intention to join the BRICS, many opportunities for policy coordination and economic cooperation arise. There's also potential for India, Latin American countries to engage in regional bodies such as the Mercosur and CELAC. This said, India emerges as a strategic partner for Latin American and Caribbean countries in today's geopolitics. And this is particularly relevant for Brazil, where the upcoming presidential elections and the formulation of the next government's foreign policy present an opportunity for us to leverage our engagement with India. And along with the opportunities, there are also challenges like expanding and sustaining trade flows, reaching consensus on critical issues of global governance, and coordinating positions in international fora. And to maximize these opportunities and to minimize these challenges ahead of India and Latin America and the Caribbean, we must bring different sectors of the society together to think long-term strategies to leverage this relationship. In 2019, the book Brazil-India Relations Beyond the 70 Years, published by FUNAG and co-edited by CALAX, the Center for African, Latin American, and Caribbean Studies at JGU, with a contribution of some of our guests today and others, brought together articles by Brazilian and Indian experts who sought to identify new opportunities for bilateral cooperation in sectors such as defense, science and technology, and renewable energy. And the webinar today actually expands this and several other initiatives, not only by CALAX at JGU, but also our partners FGV and CARI, by offering a platform for government, for social, for private sector professionals to exchange perspectives on how to develop India-LAC relations going forward. And we hope that this platform grows into a reference group that promotes joint research, expands knowledge and mutual understanding, and contributes to confirm or to redefine priority areas for collaboration amongst our countries. And to help us achieve this goal, today we have Ambassador Suresh Reddy to review the outcomes of the recent visit by Minister Jaishankar to Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, and what the visit means for India's foreign policy strategy towards the region. Ambassador Reddy's keynote speech will be followed by comments by experts from the three countries. And in the second session, experts from Argentina, from Brazil, and Paraguay will share their views on the future directions for India-Latin America relations. And we will then close our session today with remarks by Ambassador Bordon, Vice President of CARI. So with no further ado, let me now invite Mr. Suresh Reddy, Ambassador of India to Brazil, to the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. And my compliments to all the institutions which are involved in this together. I think this is really a very wonderful initiative that we are not looking at only as Brazil or only Argentina or say Paraguay or CELAC, but are looking at a broader region engagement. And so I'm very happy to be here, and it's a privilege for me to be here. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to speak. We recognize that we had a very good relationship with the region, but perhaps we were not doing justice. I think justice from both sides is how I would put it. And so for the past, say, 3 years, we have been really focusing on the region. And this has been reflected in a large number of visits. You would have seen we had the visit of our president. I think he visited 6 times in the last 3 years. Our vice president visited, if I remember correctly, about 5 times. And our prime minister himself, I mean, he has been to Argentina, he has been to Brazil, and been to Mexico. And he also had a meeting with all the heads of state and government, the CARICOM heads of state government meetings in New York in 2019. And of course, we have been having various multilateral meetings, the India CELAC quartet meetings. We have been having India CARICOM foreign ministers meetings. A lot of things have been happening at the political level. But I think it was the pandemic which made us look at India more closely, is how I will put it, from this region. Now, I've been here for 2 years. And my understanding, what I see here is something very interesting. That for people in this region, India is a wonderful country. It is growing, but it's an exotic country, which is very far away. Okay, that is how I will put it. It is in contrast to what I see the understanding in, say, UK or Europe or in the US. Their understanding of India is completely different. Their understanding of India is that this is the country which I want to be my partner. This is a country with whom I want to develop my relations. While in the case of our friends in this region, it is, as I mentioned, that beautiful exotic country where we go for yoga, for Ayurveda, for maybe some movies, etc. This understanding is very interesting. I found it rather surprising, but I can understand why that is the case. Because we think of a few reasons. One, we think of the distance. But when people talk of distance, I find when they're doing so much of trade with China, India is more closer, right? And so I feel that distance is not really any more reason to be thinking about. And especially when you have good connectivity by air, especially. And then second is language. Now, today, I don't speak Portuguese, I don't speak Spanish, but I'm able to communicate in Brazil. I follow the Brazilian newspapers thanks to Google Translate. And so I read everything. I read a lot of columns, I read a lot of opinions. And I'm also able to converse with people thanks to Google Translate. And so I don't think language is also a reason. It is just the fact that in the minds of our friends in the region that India is still a developing country. Okay. Now, what happened 10 years ago, just to give a perspective, was that if you look at Brazil, since I'm in Brazil, I'll be referring to Brazil a bit more than other countries in the region. 10 years ago, Brazil was $1.8 trillion or so. And India was also $1.8 trillion. But at the same time, the per capita income in Brazil was higher, much higher than what it is in India, naturally. But today, what is the status? The status is that Indian economy is about $3.8 trillion. But if you look at it in the power purchase terms, it is even more striking that Brazil is 3.5, while India is already coming to more than $12 trillion. That is the growth of the economy in India. And that is what we are finding is happening today on the ground. That today, Indian companies are coming to the region in much larger numbers. Today, they are feeling more confident that they can handle this region, they can deal with the challenges in the region, and they are willing to come here in much larger numbers. And similarly, I find a few companies from the region are also willing to go to India because they are beginning to recognize that the Indian market, when you look at the Indian market of, say, 300 million people, it's same size as the European market. But the difference is that if you go to Europe, you still have to do your business in French, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in German, or whatever. So you may say Europe is one market, but the language is still different, right? But when you come to India, you have only English, broadly speaking, and maybe in Hindi. So you're able to tap a large market of about 300 million people for the same effort, for the same investment in terms of money, in terms of effort. And so now today, more and more companies are beginning to come to India from this region also. They're feeling a bit more confident that they can handle the challenges posed by our bureaucracy. And of course, it has become more easier to do business in India today. But one big change which is happening here is the fact that we are becoming an important partner for what is a major challenge across the region, which is employment generation. Many of my meetings here happens in the digital economy space. And even yesterday, I was in Sao Paulo with the Brazilian Minister for Education. He had come to Sao Paulo to meet one of our Indian companies involved in digital education as to how do we look at expanding and sharing our experiences for the benefit of the Brazilian public school system. And at the end of the day, the fact is that our friends in the region are large agricultural powerhouses. And you're the ones who are going to meet this challenge of global food security tomorrow. Yes. But at the same time, how are you going to create employment opportunity for your people? That is a challenge which all of us face. And that is where our companies here are making a big difference in the region. But it is not still visible in the surface. Like the University of Cali in Colombia, they did a study. They found that for every $1 million invested by the Indian company, they were generating about 27 jobs for the local population. While investment from Asia Pacific, the countries in the Asia Pacific was only generating 2.6 jobs. Only 2.6 jobs. Because the second thing is that the jobs which are being created by the Indian companies today, when you look at in the employment in the sector, these are broadly high-value jobs. High-value jobs, and which are in turn adding a lot more value to the economy than what other investments in the region are doing. To put it in perspective, for example, if you look at TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, the first 6 months of this year, they recruited 60,000 people. First 6 months of this year, 60,000 people globally. And in Latin American region alone, they recruited 16,500 people. So now you can imagine one Indian company has provided employment for 16,500 people in this region. You look at Paraguay, for example. In Paraguay, one Indian company with a local partner is employing about 1,500 people. If you look at in Argentina, again, similarly, our IT companies are much larger in number, and they're employing quite a few thousand Argentinians. In the case of Brazil, our top 5 IT companies, they're employing about 25,000 Brazilians. And also, this is not just the employment alone, but if you look at in terms of supporting the economies become prepared for the future. This is enabling the economies to become part of the new age economy. This is supporting the process of transformation into digital economy. Now, you look at the shortage of IT engineers in this region. So unless you have adequate IT engineers, how are we going to become part of the new age economy? In the case of, for example, your own services exports, Even if you look at the service exports from Brazil and in comparison with the service exports from India, now Brazil has got tremendous potential also. But what you need is the right partners. And that is where the Indian companies can become the right partners to help each of the countries in the region realize their aspirations. I'm not going much into political front because obviously Karan gave a wonderful overview. The fact is that politically we are, how should I say, not just reviving or reiterating the importance of the region for India, but we're actually strengthening our engagement with the region. As you know, we recently opened 2 new embassies, and we are expanding our partnerships. And you'll be quite surprised. If you look at today, India is already the 5th biggest trading partner for Brazil. Our trade is today more than $12 billion. And this was last year. Last year, it was $11.6 billion. But this year, we are already $8 billion plus. $8 billion plus with Brazil, making us the 5th. And I think this year, we will become the 4th biggest trading partner for Brazil. And similarly for Argentina, we are already the 4th biggest trading partner. Now, here you look at it, this is a very important trading partnership because we don't import much of your soya, we don't import your meat, we don't really import much of your chicken. But in spite of that, we are having a very healthy relationship. And here, I believe, especially with Brazil, recently we just signed last week when our energy secretary, he had come to Brazil, petroleum secretary, we signed some very interesting agreement. One agreement was for long-term purchase of crude. This is the first such contract we are signing with Petrobras, under which we will be importing about $1.3 billion of crude from Brazil. And that is only one company. We got 3 more companies which are going to be signing soon. And if that happens, we are talking of Brazil's exports going up by almost $5 billion only for petroleum. And that's going to be a huge market for Brazil. Plus, it's also helping you to diversify. It's helping you to diversify, reduce the risk for your economy. And also another interesting discussion which we had was joining hands with Brazil and looking at third country investment opportunities. With Petrobras, we are talking to Petrobras about investing in third countries also. And we are also looking at investing in your refining sector in different sectors. We recently, last month, we announced a $1.6 billion investment in the hydrocarbon sector. With that investment, our total investment in Brazil, only in the hydrocarbon sector, would be about $5 billion. And we are going to announce another $1 billion soon. So that would make it almost $6 billion only in the hydrocarbon sector and only in Brazil. But what is more interesting is that I also got 3 different announcements going to be made soon about putting up manufacturing units in Brazil, 3 more Indian companies. And I just got a proposal from another big Indian company wanting to put up a big steel mill, a ferrous alloy mill in Brazil, which will be about another $750 million worth of investment. In addition to another company in Sao Paulo, which is going to announce an investment of close to $1 billion. So if you look at it from the period of last month, is from September to December, you're talking of Indian companies announcing almost $4 billion worth of investment in Brazil alone. 4 months, $4 billion. No, sorry, it is more. It's almost close to $5 billion worth of investments happening in Brazil alone within this region. I think that really speaks the scale and the potential of the Indian companies and also the potential for partnerships. In reverse, I also find a large number of Brazilian companies are looking at India actively. We already have 2 defense-related companies, Taurus and CBC. They have already put up joint ventures in India. And the interesting part in this is that when they go to India, they recognize that it's not just the Indian market, but from India, you get access to the much larger region. You get access to the Southeast Asian market, you get access to the Gulf market, you get much larger market by being in India. And I'm glad to say that CBC has already got 1 more order from a third country after they opened their office in India. So it's already started to happen. And of course, when you look at defense, Indian market today is perhaps the most active, it's the most dynamic market. because our defense budget, as you know, is about $77 billion, and in which our capital procurement itself is quite large. Almost 50% of it today goes for our capital procurement. It's simply because of the environment in which we live in. So we are committed to strengthening our defense, and we are committed to doing what is needed. And part of that process is that we are also encouraging companies to put up manufacturing units in India, because of our own market is big enough. And so we want to address those supply chain challenges. And so we prefer to have them manufactured in India. And it is happening. Today, more and more companies are opening offices, are manufacturing in India to cater to the Indian defense market itself. And in parallel, also, many of our defense companies are now coming out. They are right now, in the case of Brazil, many have visited, many are talking with the Minister of Defense in Brazil. For some of them are also looking at putting up some manufacturing units in Brazil itself for looking at the region. And so there's a strong partnership which we are building in the defense sector. And one of the visible symbols of this defense partnership is the visit of our naval ship, INS Tarkash, which visited last month to Brazil. It was the first visit of a ship in almost 25 years. And it came especially to celebrate the 200 years of Brazilian independence and 75 years of India's independence. I mean, it was a happy coincidence. And so our ship came and we celebrated the National Day on board the ship. And we were grateful for the presence of His Excellency, the President of Brazil, Mr. Bolsonaro. He was on board the ship joining us to celebrate on this historic day. But something more interesting is also happening. We are looking at building a new era of partnerships. If you look at in biofuels, in ethanol, we really admire the success of Brazil. But today we are becoming the third biggest manufacturer, producer of ethanol. I think we are already crossing 5 billion liters of ethanol. We have already achieved 10% fuel mix, and we have got a commitment of going up to 20% fuel mix in the next 3 years. But more interestingly, we are also talking to Brazil and the US to look at establishing a global biofuel alliance. Because when you talk of e-mobility, you have to produce electricity. So how are you going to produce electricity? That is going to decide the sustainability of the venture, actually, the sustainability of the mobility. And that is where, in the case of ethanol, it is truly a sustainable product. And that is why we are committed to promoting ethanol globally also as part of this biofuel alliance. And another area, interesting development which happened was yesterday, the day before yesterday, where Embraer announced a partnership with an Indian company called Blade India. Blade India has placed an order for 200 choppers, helicopters from aircrafts from Embraer. And not only it is for 200 electric aircrafts, but it is also for doing additional joint research in the same field. So that is going to be one new area of interest for both sides. And we are already having discussions between Embraer and some of the other Indian entities, such as our Hindustan Aeronautics and others, for doing some joint research in the field of aviation. And here the biofuel alliance also becomes important because of the Sustainable Aviation Fuel project. That also becomes equally important. And one, I think few months back with Ivan, we had a session about India-Brazil economic partnership. And at that time, the view was that Brazil had limited products to offer to India. Because your main exports for the region is what? Agricultural products. Many of them were not what we consume. And so that time, my view was that you should not look at what you want to sell, but rather look at what the market is buying and see if you can meet the requirement of the market. Now, I'll mention this, I'll explain this. If you look at our trade is about $450 billion. India's export-import, $450 billion. Now, we import quite a lot. We import about $200 billion worth of products. Somebody is supplying us $200 billion, right? So why not this region also identify what we import. I mean, for example, since we have all the three countries which are present, Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. You look at pulses. How much of pulses we import? We import quite a lot of pulses from all over the world, and we import quite a few $1 billion worth of pulses. Similarly, you can produce pulses for the Indian market. It's always in need. Anybody living in India, they know the importance of the dal and how much we consume dal on a daily basis. And similarly, you look at soya oil. Argentina and Paraguay are very important supplies of soya oil. But I'm saying, look beyond soya oil. Why don't you look at sunflower oil, for example? Recently you saw a sharp increase in import of soya oil from the region. I think in the case of Brazil, it's already $1 billion. In the case of Argentina and Paraguay, it is much more. But why look at only soya oil? Why don't you look at other oils also? Because where is the growth happening? It's in India. Indian population is growing. It is already going to become the biggest in the world. And we are a country which is in need of, we are self-sufficient in food. We are certainly self-sufficient in many things, but we still need more items. We still need more oil. We still need more pulses. And we still need, like, for example, your sesame seeds. Brazil is now today producing sesame seeds. And I was told by Minister Teresa Cristina that the acreage is increasing every day simply because they got a ready-made market in India. And so people are willing to invest in that. And the one important area which I really want to talk about is also about the health security. When people started to look at India with a new eye, it was on the pandemic. Suddenly, people started to talk, oh, how come, India is producing so many vaccines and the Indian companies, are so large and etc. I think suddenly everybody started to recognize the strength of Indian industry in the pharma sector. And they started to recognize the advancement, technically how advanced they are. And third, suddenly they all realized how much dependent they were also upon the critical medicines during this pandemic, when the supply chain got disrupted. When you go forward, when you look at the frequency of the pandemics, when you look at the frequency of the health-related challenges which are coming up, I believe that we do not have a choice but to build a strong partnership in the field of healthcare. Because how much of budget can every government keep diverting to the public healthcare program? It can only divert so much. But as the challenges keep increasing, we need to build stronger partnerships. And here recently we had about 80 Indian pharma companies come to Brazil. They came to Sao Paulo. And the message they brought was that, yes, for us, Brazil is a market. But more than a market, we are looking at building partnerships. They wanted to invest in Brazil. They wanted to look at having Brazil as a base and look beyond Brazil. Look at supplying to other markets in the region. And that would be my message for our friends in Argentina also, or be it in Paraguay, but especially for Argentina, that we need to go beyond the traditional thing of competition. We need to look at building partnerships, because it's only with partnerships we'll be able to handle these challenges, which we're all confronted with, be it today or the future challenges which are coming. And the frequency is only increasing. When you look at the series of health-related challenges which are all confronted with, and every day we keep hearing of a new virus, every day we keep hearing of a new challenge. And that is where it becomes important to build on this partnership. Essentially, what we are doing here in the region, one, we are looking at building a partnership for prosperity, which means, not just sharing our experiences, but essentially working together by promoting our trade, by promoting our investments, by sharing our experiences. Because as I say, that the world will not be able to realize the 2030 agenda unless we are able to realize it. And to realize the 2030 agenda, we need to work together. We need to share our experiences. Because today, what is happening in India? India has become the center of technology usage for enabling people to grow, for enabling people to realize their aspirations. We have recognized that's the only way by which we can empower our people. And that's the only way in which we could also make them part of the growth story. And that is something which is a very valuable experience, which we are sharing with our friends in the region and beyond. And similarly, when you look at the new age economy, I believe our companies are playing a very active role, because you look at every Latin American country. Today, Indian companies have become big employers. They have become big employers. As I mentioned, in Brazil, they're already employing more than 20,000 people. In Paraguay, they're employing about 2,000. In Argentina, another 6,000 something. Or if you look at Mexico, they're employing more than 30,000 Mexicans. Or if you go this side to Chile or even Guatemala, in Guatemala, they're employing about 2,000, if I'm not mistaken. So in every country today, Indian companies have become important employment providers. And not just employment, but high-value employment, and the two digital, preparing the country, enabling them to become part of the digital economy, the part of the new age economy. It's basically a partnership of, in the process, they're also promoting innovation. In the process, they're also preparing the companies to join the creative economy. And if you look at in the case of Brazil, again, we have some of our startups which are present, like Byju's. Byju's is already here. They've already invested more than 110 million reais. And they already have about, I think, 1,000 teachers. It is growing, and it is growing very rapidly. It is making the youth prepare for the future. And fundamentally, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to build a global partnership with our friends in the region. Because when you look at the challenges are such that no country can meet those challenges by itself. We all need to have that partnership as friends, because we are all liberal democracies. We share the same values, which is freedom of speech, freedom of religion, respect of rule of law. And what we are trying to do is that we are trying to give you alternate partners. We are trying to show you that India can be your alternate partner, because of you're also having a large economic partnership with one country. But then the difference is that the values are different. The values which we share are the values which are what we want to preserve going forward, which is the respect for rule of law and democracy. And that is what we are trying to do. And that is why our partnership is very important going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Reddy. I'm going to pass now to my colleague Umesh Mukhi, who will moderate the next session.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Ambassador, for all these insights. Lots of exciting times post-pandemic, so a lot to catch up. Moving forward with our panelists who represent various sectors from Paraguay, Argentina, Brazil, I would first like to invite our representative from Brazil, Daniela Castro. She's the Secretary of Research, Industrial Policy and Defense Production from Ministry of Defense, to share some insights. And then I'll just follow up with other panelists. I had to put Daniela first because she has to leave, and then I'll follow up with Manuel Gonzalo, Maria, and Ivan, and Raul from Paraguay. So our panelists have 5 minutes to contemplate and give their perspectives. And then eventually with the insights from all the panelists, we will then follow up with Q&A. So over to you, Daniela, looking forward for your insights.
Good morning. Bueno, voy a hablar en nuestro idioma y el doctor Kimian va a hacer la traducción. Muy buenos días, un gusto participar en este panel.
Good morning, and we'll speak in Spanish. Leonardo, me, is going to do the translation. It's a pleasure to be in this panel.
Bien, brevemente vamos a hablar sobre ciencia, tecnología y producción para la defensa, la vinculación que lleva adelante Argentina con India.
Briefly, we are going to talk about the linkage between Argentina and India in terms of science, technology, and production in defense field.
Bien, en primer lugar, los antecedentes de esta vinculación están en el MOU que se firmó en el año 2019 y que venía trabajándose desde el año 2010.
Firstly, we find the Memorandum of Understanding on Defense Cooperation, which was signed between the defense ministries of both countries, and it was based on talks started back in 2010.
Que incluye los intercambios y la cooperación en materia de ciencia, tecnología y producción para la defensa.
That MOU includes areas of cooperation in science, technology, and production for defense.
A su vez, fue muy importante este año la reunión de la comisión mixta entre India y Argentina con la presencia del ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de India.
Also, it was very important this year, 2022, the India-Argentine Joint Commission meeting that was held in our country with the relevant presence of the Indian Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Bien, y como resultado de esa reunión se manifestó la importancia de la cooperación en sectores estratégicos, entre ellos defensa.
In such an occasion, the authorities made a joint declaration in which they laid down the purpose of cooperation in strategic sectors, including defense.
A su vez, este año tuve la oportunidad de visitar New Delhi y Bangalore en el mes de marzo.
Also, this year in March, Secretary Castro had the opportunity and the honor to visit India, New Delhi and Bangalore in March this year.
Y entre otras de las reuniones que llevamos adelante en India, tuve la posibilidad de reunirme con el presidente de la Organización de Investigación y Desarrollo para la Defensa.
And among other meetings, I had the opportunity to meet the Secretary of the Department of Defense, Research and Development, and the President of the Defense Research and Development Organization.
Entre los temas que abordamos en aquella misión, trabajamos sobre generar marcos de cooperación y vinculación que permitan incrementar las capacidades de investigación, desarrollo y producción para la defensa.
Among other conversation topics at those meetings, we had the opportunity to talk about ways to generate cooperation framework linked to the strengthening of research, development, innovation, and production capacities in areas of defense.
Áreas como ciberdefensa, sistemas no tripulados y la industria aeronáutica.
Areas such as cyber defense, unmanned systems, and aeronautics industry.
Y durante este mes recibimos una delegación de la empresa HAL y Bell.
Also, this month, September 2022, we received a delegation from India with representatives of the companies HAL and Bell.
Que estuvieron también recorriendo las instalaciones de la fábrica argentina de aviones, FADEA.
They had the opportunity to visit the facilities of the Argentine aircraft factory, the state-run defense factory, FADEA.
Para nuestro país es importante potenciar la industria, la producción para la defensa.
For our country, it's very important to give potential to the aircraft defense industry.
Y próximamente una delegación de FADEA visitará HAL.
And soon a representation by FADEA will visit HAL, the Indian company.
Bien, en concreto, ¿cuál es la agenda de trabajo, de oportunidades y de posibilidades entre India y Argentina en materia de ciencia, tecnología, industria para la defensa?
In sum, which is the agenda of the working agenda in matters of science, technology, and production for defense between India and Argentina?
Posibilidad de transferencias tecnológicas.
We look for possibilities of technological transfer.
Desarrollos conjuntos.
Joint development.
Oportunidades para la coproducción entre Argentina e India de aeronaves.
The opportunity for co-production between Argentina and India in the aircraft industry.
Formación del personal, tanto de las Fuerzas Armadas como de las áreas de ciencia y tecnología.
personnel training, both from the military and also science and technology sectors.
Intercambio de experiencias y posibilidades en la conformación de un ecosistema de conocimiento e industria para la defensa.
Exchange of experiences and the possibility of joint working in an ecosystem of science and technology for defense.
A su vez, tenemos pendiente poder concretar un webinar para justamente trabajar sobre las posibilidades de cooperación donde participen todas las industrias y los organismos que llevan adelante los desarrollos científicos y tecnológicos en materia de defensa con nuestra contraparte India.
In that sense, we have pending the development of a webinar on cooperation possibilities in industry and production for defense between Argentina and India, with the participation of companies from both countries, but also all other sectors linked to technology and industry in defense matters.
En definitiva, existe una voluntad y una acción que ratifica la vinculación entre Argentina e India.
In sum, there is a political will to develop this cooperation and linkage between Argentina and India.
Y esperamos y deseamos que en los próximos años podamos trabajar en cooperaciones en concreto.
And we wish and we look forward to working together in future years in specific projects.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniela, for shedding light. I know we have some questions here, but considering the span of time we have to give to other panelists, we'll rather take up these questions in the end. I would now like to follow up with Manuel Gonzalo. You are the coordinator of India-Asia Working Group at Argentinian Council of International Relations. Please share with us your insights, Manuel.
Thank you very much, Umesh. Thank you, Ambassador Reddy. Thank you, Leah, Karin, and all the people here. It was a pleasure to me to listen to the presentation of Ambassador Reddy. I will mainly make 3 comments, but they will end with 3 questions to the ambassador, because I think that he has the main voice here. So my 3 issues will be related, one with the global level and the impacts in the region. The second one related to the regional level, mainly Mercosur and BRICS. And the third one at the economic level, related with the momentum that we are living, related with food and fuel, and the possibilities of diversification of our relationship. So at the first level, we are all seeing the emerging of Asia as a main player in the global capitalism, and India in the 21st century is having a main place, particularly the category that India is pushing at the global level is the one of the Indo-Pacific. In this category, of course, the Indian Ocean is having a main place in the global capitalism. Related to this, of course, the geopolitical competition between China and the US is also having a main place at the global level, and it has implications, of course, related with India, as India has a main place in Asia and in the Indian Ocean. In this sense, and related with Latin America, I would like to ask Ambassador how to do foreign policy in the middle of these 2 main players, such as the US and China, and how is India and you dealing with this challenge? For example, the last week or the last 2 weeks, Governor of Argentina, Gerardo Morales, said that the US has to put the same money that China is putting in the region. well, I would like to know your opinion in this sense and how you deal with this challenge, because soft power has a main role, but also hard power, money, and cooperation and financing has a main role, particularly in our countries of South America, that of course we need financing, we need export, we need US dollars. So how you deal with this challenge of these two giants playing in the region? This is like a first main question. At the second level, of course, the Shankar visit to Latin America was mainly focused in Brazil, Paraguay, and Argentina. So it was a visit explicitly focused on South America. Yeah, and in this sense, I would like if you could comment some insights related to the role of South America related to India. In particular, we have a colleague from Paraguay. We have several colleagues from Paraguay. I think that it was the first time that a foreign ministry was in Paraguay, at least in the embassy, because it was open 2 months ago. And so if you have some insight about which is the meaning of this new embassy in Paraguay for India. Related to this, for us and for you, of course, BRICS are a main bloc, but also Mercosur is a main bloc. Yeah, and so a question would be oriented to how could the South American countries orient their relationship with India through BRICS, through BRICSAP. I mean, with Argentina, with Paraguay. How to think the future of the BRICS, and how to think the future of Mercosur, India. For example, there are several projects of a free trade agreement, Mercosur, India. What do you think about this? This is the second level of issues. And finally, at the third level, of course, that we are living in a world that food and fuels are extremely relevant in this moment. Yeah, and of course that Latin America has a main role in giving food and fuels to the world. Shankar, in his visit, in the different talks that he gave, he always speak about food and fuels and the relevance of Latin America to provide food and fuels to India. This is, of course, really important for our countries. I would like the ambassador to comment a little bit more on mining, petrochemical, and renewable energies. Of course, it could be in Brazil or at the level of Mercosur. You know that nowadays we are having like a boom of lithium in the South Cone. What is your opinion on lithium and which are the interests of the Indian companies on lithium, which is the agenda on this aspect? And finally, this webinar want to expand the horizons of the relationship between Latin America and India. So nowadays, food and fuels are our main exports to India. Yeah, overall, we mainly export food and fuels. So if we have to talk about how to expand this relationship, of course that we have to talk about new sectors, new actors, and of course that ambassador is really interested in startups and venture capital ecosystem. I would like him to talk with his experience in Brazil. What could we do here, for example, in Argentina, related to software and biotech industry? This is one issue. Second, related to pharma. How are you dealing with pharma? Because you know that our pharma industry is also aware that India could be a competition. So how you mix these two industries? And finally, which is the role of the Indian state-owned enterprises related to energy. Because the last week it was announced a joint venture between Petrobras and state-owned enterprise of Brazil. For example, in Argentina, we have Vaca Muerta. How could we deep this relationship at the energy level? I know that there are many questions, but if you could answer some of them, this would be interesting for me and for us, I think. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Manuelo. I'm sure Ambassador is noting down a lot of questions because your time will come to, compile all the questions and answer it all together, because panelists and the press have contemplated on that. I'll move on to Professor Maria Musino. She's also the editor of Energy Review, and perhaps the person we know is very much specialized in the area of India, Latin America, India-Brazil relations, specifically to energy. And would be very much curious to hear your insights on how she sees this energy cooperation in India-LATAM scenario. Over to you, Maria.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador Suresh Reddy, all members of this table, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank Professor Karin Vasquez and all the institutions responsible for promoting this event, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to participate in this dialogue. Thank you very much and congratulations. It was very interesting to hear from Ambassador Suresh Reddy how diverse the areas that India and Latin America can collaborate. Congratulations, sir, for your great job. India and Latin America are places characterized by diversity, which is why they are so unique and yet similar. Both places are very representative in terms of peoples and cultures, and have natural resources whose scientific importance is beyond contestation. Maybe it's interesting to highlight here that many of the protected areas in India and in Latin America are of global interest, not only because they're known endemic species, and the endemic species not cataloged yet, but also because of their species which can be a biological risk. Moreover, in those places, there are natural resources which are essential for life, such as bodies of water and resources potentially useful for energy production. India's and Latin America's economic, political, social, and environmental diversity highlight the complexity involved in the development of comparative approaches. However, their unique characteristics added to their strategic relevance make India and Latin America potential partners and objects of study in a wide range of themes. One of those themes is energy. Energy is crucial for the development of human activities related to economy, health, and education. And in an interdependent post-pandemic world, energy safety will mostly depend on how countries relate to each other, bilaterally and or multilaterally. In this context, energy transition is extremely important to reach energy security, to reduce dependence in politically dependent regions, and especially after pandemics, to reach the goals established in the 2030 agenda. Brazil and India, for example, are in the gravity center of global energy production and consumption. Both countries have developed renewable energy policies, have increased their investments in this area, and their scientific production, especially in the past 20 years. Despite their main partners in scientific and technological areas still are the same as 50 years ago, mainly in developed countries. Just to emphasize, Brazil is the main partner of India in Latin America in scientific and technological production in renewables. And India is the main partner of Brazil in Asia, but this representation is around 1%. Brazil is ahead in the creation and development of policies in the area of renewable energy and in the development of technologies related to the use of biofuels. For example, India has stood out particularly in the market of solar energy. And in spite of the tendency of a global fragmentation, to talk about cooperation has never been so important. Scientific and technological cooperation between countries like India and Brazil is not only a tool to boost the competitiveness among the states, but also a strategic instrument of geopolitics, since the search for a global reference in sustainable development relativizes the understanding of the concept of the power, mostly seen as something strictly linked to the military or economic issues. The concept of power has started even more to incorporate the idea of power as intrinsic to the form of environmental governance. That is environmental power. If you allow me, sir, I would like to know more about India perspective and how India and Brazil can improve cooperation for energy transition and becoming global leaders in this matter. And are biofuels a promising area for the relations between India and Latin America, and more specifically between India and Brazil? How to promote this market, because we have a lot of challenges, right? In the face, for example, of global subsidies of biofuels. Just a data to finalize, investments in fossil fuels in COVID-19 period recovery packages were 6 times greater than the level of investments allocated to renewable energy worldwide. So this is a big challenge, not only for Brazil and India, I'm sure, but from the world. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maria. I really like the concept of environmental power, which would closely relate to 1.5 degrees target and NDCs when it comes to commit to global goals. We'll follow up with Ivan, as we started with Argentina and now we're heading to Brazil. Ivan, you are advisor at Ministry of Economy of Brazil. We would like to know what's going on there in Brasilia with respect to current climate and how Brazil is trying to understand in terms of its economic priorities to partner with India. So over to you, Ivan, and after you, we'll be following up with Raul, who is the ambassador of Paraguay at World Trade Organization. Ivan, please go ahead.
And thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to see Ambassador Reddy once again. Well, I'm going to be quite straightforward. And first, let me just say that what I say here are my own ideas, and they do not necessarily reflect the ones of the Minister of Economy. I'm now free to say what I want to say. Ambassador, 3 points. I think our relationship with India, Brazil, India one, is a multi-track relationship. It is clearly based on bilateral ties, and I'm going to put a specific question for you on that, but it's also based on IPSA, on BRICS, on G20, on UN issues, on WTO reform issues. And so there is plenty of different tracks where we can see that Brazil and India have been, in fact, doing a lot together. and where we do see some common challenges and very good room for cooperation and concertation and at some level between our two countries. So when it comes to the bilateral agenda, you mentioned the very interesting event that we hosted last year between IPEA and the Indian Embassy. And let me just quote the interesting paper that we released back then. It was the Brazil and Indian relationships, a peculiar relationship with a big potential. If you go to IPEA's webpage, you'll find the final version of this paper. An interesting one that really goes deep when it comes to assessing, especially trade and investment connections between Brazil and India. And just to bring something from that paper that I think continues to be quite relevant to our bilateral trade and investment relations, for example, there is an assessment there in the paper that goes to what are the products that have great potential to be exported from Brazil to India, for example, and that goes from the ones that we already export, like oil or sugar, also going to basic chemicals, to aircraft, other different kinds of machineries and so on. And also there's an assessment on what India could export to Brazil on page 14, that it also brings plenty, 52 different projects where there is a good demand in Brazil, and that India is a great exporter, and so should quite easily match export and import, something that Ambassador has already mentioned here in his speech. So my point here on our bilateral ties, and I'm sorry that there are plenty of work going on in my building right now, so you're going to maybe hear some noise here and there. But my point would be on trade issues, Ambassador. We have a very shallow trade agreement between Mercosur and India, only 452 products are covered. How India sees this trade agenda with Mercosur, any space for increasing the numbers, maybe not really talking about a free trade agreement, but bringing more products into our basket in a way that we can push tariffs down. And tariffs are very important. They continue to be very important, both for Brazil and for Indian trade policies. And so bring tariffs down would definitely generate important impacts in our trade agenda, but also bringing services into the agenda, but also bringing non-tariff barriers. So how do you see the trade agenda between Mercosur and India? Any space for moving forward and having a meaningful trade deal with India? On the second track, my question would be focused on IBSA, and BRICS is also very important, but I do see that right now we have an opportunity when it comes to IBSA, and there somehow we shift a little bit from the economic issues, trade, investment, production related issues, and going, let's say, to more social protection issues, cooperation on health issues, educational issues, maybe defense issues too, where IBSA has a lot to say. How do you see this agenda related to IBSA cooperation? What are the key elements or key issues that India stresses on its strategy towards IBSA, where we could really push forward and maybe bring IBSA back on track? I think there's a lot to be done there, especially given the kind of countries that are participating and touching on some of the issues that Ambassador has already mentioned here. And the third question related to, let's say, to the plurilateral global agenda, G21, goes to finance. So trade when it comes to bilateral, social, health, and educational issues related to it on our plurilateral track. And when it comes to G20 issues, the finance, let's say, track especially, how do you see the priorities of India to the presidency of the G20. And there's one specific issue, or maybe two, related to finance that I'd like to touch here. One has to do with debt of developing countries. We've seen a very huge increase in debt in different countries all over the world, in developing countries and poor countries. But there is a huge burden right now for many countries, especially poor countries, that they're not going to be able to pay, and there's something needs to be done. And the G20 should be an interesting place to push forward the common framework for that review and things like that. How do you see India playing a role there? What kind of issues could we maybe try to bring together Brazil and India, given that we have India, Brazil, and South Africa as at the presidency of the G20? So maybe a good moment to push forward a developing country agenda to the G20. But also when it comes to finance, on the role of multilateral development banks. They are there for some time, they're doing a lot, but there's lots of criticism on the way many developing countries, many multilateral development banks are dealing with the money they have, and even in a way trying to maybe use them more effectively. If you take, for example, the IMF new fund, the Resilience and the Sustainability Fund, Trust Fund, that was supposed to deal with this need for money in a moment like the one we're living right now after the pandemic, and the money is not really getting to those in need. The countries that are really in need are not really getting the money. Trust funds just getting too much of a time to be implemented, and maybe using the multilateral development banks in all their connections with different countries all over the world could be an interesting way to make the money get to those in need more effectively and more rapidly. And so how do you see the role of NDB, for example, in this juncture where we would need using the finance tract of the G20 to push a developing country agenda and maybe shaking a little bit the structures of the old G20 somehow? Those are some of the questions. Well, Ambassador is being bombarded by questions. I don't know, maybe we need 2 or 3 hours to get the answers, but thank you again. It's a pleasure to be with you, and count on me on this agenda. It's definitely a very important one for this country.
Thank you, Ivan. Just getting back to you with respect to that paper, I would really appreciate if you can also have an executive summary for business professionals, because I went through that paper. Trust me, it's only for economics, you know. So I would really appreciate, you know, because it helps us for our students as well, and also help a lot of people to understand with.
I'll let the panel.
I'll jump to Mr. Raul Cano, who is the ambassador of Paraguay to World Trade Organization, to get more insights from Paraguay, and then eventually we can consolidate all these questions and have ambassador to reply to them. So Raul, please, up to you.
Good morning for everyone. Thank you very much. Allow me to thank, first of all, this webinar, and particularly the India Latin American Dialogue Expanding Horizon. I want to thank, first of all, Karina Vasquez for inviting me to join this this session. I want to thank Ambassador Reddy. I want to thank the moderator, Umesh Maki, and of course, my predecessor. I want to do my view in terms of Latin American-India relation from the global perspective, then from the Mercosur and Paraguay relation, and what we see on the next step for India and Paraguay relation. I want to highlight what has been mentioned by the Ambassador already, particularly in terms of Paraguay. We share the same value with India: democracy, human rights, and rule of law. In terms of the global view, India has been signed recently an FTA agreement with Australia and United Arab Emirates, and is having an ongoing negotiation for a free trade agreement with the EU, Canada, and Great Britain. Whereas with Latin America, India has just 2 PTA agreements. The first one with Mercosur and the second one with Chile. Has been mentioned before, the Mercosur India PTA agreement just has less than 500 items, so there is a lot of room there to promote. In terms of the trade value, India has a trade value with Latin America back in 2021, roughly between 30 and 50 million, whereas China has a 400 billion export with Latin America. China invests in Latin America is roughly around $159 billion and have a loan to Latin American country for 136 billion, whereas India has an investment with in Latin America just 16 billion. So there is a lot of room to make here in Latin America. Ambassador already has mentioned 2 key issues from my point of view. There is a distance and there is a language barrier, but we are ready to overcome those barriers. In term of the what Paraguay is, what is the trade trend between Paraguay and India. With Paraguay represent, the export of Paraguay to India represent just 2% of our total export. In terms of value, represent 226 million, but 94% of our export is just concentrated in oilseed. Ambassador already has mentioned that they don't need only soya oil, but they need as well sunflower oil. And in the case of Paraguay, we are ready to export to India on top of the soya oil as well as sunflower oil. In terms of the importation of the export India to Paraguay, represent in terms of value 400 million, with in terms of represent less than 4% of our total import. We received a very important visit this year. 2 months back, we received the visit of the Minister Jay Shankar under the 60 years of the diplomatic relation with India, and it was a very good support for our foreign policy, because India has decided to open its embassy here in Paraguay. That is a very good support for our external policy, and we want to thank India for giving that step into Paraguay. In terms of the what we wanted, I want to highlight as well what has been mentioned by the ambassador already. We don't want to have only trade. We want to have investment, but particularly we want to build partnership. Paraguay has not to be known just for commodity exporter. We want to go to the next step. We want to add value to our export. So there is a lot of room in terms of cooperation, particularly in IT, electromobility, renewable energy, particularly hydro energy and solar energy, as well as in the automobile sector, in agriculture, auto parts, pharmaceutical, IT, petrochemical, and we wanted to do a very next step with India, not only as Paraguay, but also as a Mercosur country. As I mentioned before, we have a PTA agreement with India, and Mercosur has been making some signals to India to go to the next level, negotiating a free trade agreement. India's presence in Latin America has a lot of room to improve, and we wanted to do the very next step. In terms of our next step, Paraguay wanted to build that partnership that has been mentioned by Ambassador already. Again, we are really keen to receive investment into Paraguay. Ambassador Reddy has mentioned that we have a couple of investment in Paraguay, which are employing more than 2,000 people. We're ready to do some other investment, and we wanted to share the same value with India at the WTO organization. As there is a key point here in Paraguay, we have no diplomatic relation with mainland China. We have a diplomatic relation with Taiwan. So Ambassador Reddy, we are ready to receive more cooperation and investment into Paraguay because we share the same value. What have been done in Paraguay? We are constructing what we call the bioceanic corridor, which pass for the center of Paraguay, which will link the Ocean Pacific to the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. In particular, Paraguay are building this road with a view of giving a very big step in terms of our geopolitical approach to the Asia Pacific, in particular with the Indo-Pacific. So we are developed the infrastructure. We need a lot of investment, and we wanted to call upon the Indian entrepreneur, Indian investment, to see what Paraguay can offer in terms of moving ahead in our agenda. We wanted to do what has been mentioned by my predecessor, nearshoring to producing to add value for the raw material that we produce, as well as the raw material where we can import, having into account the Mercosur market. I'm going to be very easy with Ambassador Reddy. I have no question, but we wanted to do those next steps, and we wanted to thank the government of India because of his decision to open the embassy 2 months ago here in Asunción. Ambassador Sowan is a key player for us, and we wanted to thank as well because with this year we held the 60th anniversary of our diplomatic relation between Paraguay and India. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and see you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Raul. And just to make my job much more easier, the toughest job, but easier for Ambassador Reddy, if I would divide the questions which were asked in different categories. There were questions related to defense and energy cooperation. There were questions related to multilateral BRICS agenda. We had certain queries from media, from Sputnik, from Hindu, from Financial Express, as well on how India is positioning itself with respect to BRICS, G20, and the issue of Ukraine-Russia war. There was also a question related to the capacity and training development, specifically with respect to Argentina. And now getting into more specifics, like so you have these 3 categories to respond, and then even the 4th category where a new emerging opportunity with Paraguay. A very specific question which was asked by media when it came to defense cooperation was related to what you highlighted on Embraer's capacity to help India. And also we see that there is a potential collaboration opportunity with Embraer, with Hindustan Aeronautics, or Hindustan Aeronautics with LCA aircraft carrier for Argentina as well. So perhaps you could shed light on that, and then you can go on different topics with respect to economy, multilateral agenda, and an overall perspective on the region. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you. I really, appreciate the points that have been made, and because they kind of help me to elaborate a bit more. Since a wonderful overview was given by Professor Karen, I didn't touch many of those issues, and I knew that there would be some more food for thought. So again, I did not touch on some of the other issues. But I will start with what the distinguished ambassador to WTO, Ambassador Raul, had mentioned. See, we are not looking to compete with China, period. We are looking to build a strong partnership between India and the region. That's our agenda, right? And that is a mutually beneficial agenda that we are promoting here. Because if you look at having a strong partnership with China, that's fine. We have no comments to offer on that. But all I'm telling you is that we are willing to give you, we are willing to become your preferred partner in the other sectors which are there in the economy. As I mentioned, agriculture has given you a wonderful platform to build upon. But at the same time, the more mechanized the agriculture becomes, the more high-tech agriculture becomes, you also need to look at how do we create employment for the rest of the country? How are you going to promote the rest of the economic sector? Because that is where the competitiveness of your industry comes into play. And that is where your overall growth is going to come into play, because at the end of the day, it is a commodity and commodities go through cycles. While if you have an active, dynamic industrial sector, a manufacturing sector, or a services sector, they would always provide the cushion for the country when you have the ups and downs in the commodity cycle. And that's what we are offering. That we are offering to be a preferred partner for the rest of the economy, be it in terms of manufacturing or be it in the services sector. To put it in perspective, yesterday somebody showed me a number. In the case of Brazil, I do not know how far it is correct because I didn't check it, but this was told by a Brazilian gentleman. He said Brazil had exported about 200 billion reais worth of software exports, while the same number in the case of India is about $240 billion. And not only that, imagine, I do not know how many of you are aware of this most recent report which has come out. In the case of the US, the Indian IT companies in the year 2021, I'm talking of only last year, they created 204,000 jobs, 204,000 jobs only in the US, and average salary of $140,000. Average salary of $140,000, and the Indian IT companies added $300 billion to the American economy last year. Now, imagine if you're able to have that kind of a presence in this region. Obviously, your economy would also be growing faster, your employment would be growing more rapidly, and your exports would be proportionately increasing even more rapidly. But one challenge which I find is that you need to attract Indians to come here to the region. Here I'm talking of the visa issues. Unless you open the door and make it easy for people to travel between the two countries, I'm afraid we would be still limited by the potential that is possible. That is a fact, because seeing is believing. It's only when they come here and then when they see, they get convinced that, okay, this is a country with whom I can invest in. But if as a CEO, if he's going to find it difficult to get a visa, then his first perception is that, okay, if me as a CEO, if I'm finding it difficult to get a visa, then how am I going to run a business there? So automatically that block comes into the mind. So that is where the problem comes. We need to look at promoting greater trade, greater movement of people between the two countries, especially the professionals. That would be the key here, I would say. And when we opened the embassy in Paraguay, I think it was a message to not only our friends in Paraguay, but to the region, that Paraguay is today one of our preferred partners, that Paraguay is one of our trusted partners, and we are committed to building a strong relationship with Paraguay. And Mr. Rahul, I'm really grateful that you have joined us today in the webinar, and that is my message to you. And Mr. Sangwan is one of our very fine diplomats. And when our minister visited Paraguay, actually the opening of the embassy was delayed because of the pandemic. Otherwise, this should have happened even earlier. But as we say, better late than never. But the message is the same, that Paraguay is today one of our preferred and trusted partners, really. And, earlier this question was asked about South America and the visit of a minister, coming to Brazil and Argentina. Yes, I think it was a message also, because it was our first substantive visit by a foreign minister, by Dr. Jaishankar, to this region. And hence, he really wanted to engage with the countries here. He wanted to understand better how do we build a more stronger partnership, and how do we look towards the future. And this was important because also when you look at the global challenges, we are also partners in BRICS, we are partners in G20, and we are also partners globally on many of the global issues of concern. And hence, he wanted to have that conversation with the leadership of the three countries to understand better how do we shape this forward-looking partnership, how do we make it more stronger. That is why he started here with these 3 countries. And naturally, I mean, of our important partners, so naturally it was here in this region. But as I mentioned, he also in parallel, this month in September, he had conversations with the CARICOM foreign ministers in New York. All the foreign ministers were there. And similarly, he also had conversations with the CELAC, with the other ministers from the different countries. And individually also, he had many conversations with different foreign ministers in New York. So he was having conversations with various representatives from Latin America, to put it in a nutshell. But it is a commitment from us that we are going to build really a very dynamic, forward, and a very active partnership with the region. And that's what we are working on today. Now, if you look at some of the other issues which were raised in terms of the G20, see, as I mentioned, one of the challenges we face globally, is that we are not able to find solutions for the problems we are faced with. Each time we think we find a solution, there's a new problem which is coming up. I mean, we had the COVID, which put us all back by how many years? 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, frankly speaking. And then immediately after the pandemic, we now had the Ukraine crisis, which again added to that problem. And we recognize this issue of the debt trap, which you were mentioning. And that is going to be one of the important issues in discussions in the G20. Fundamentally, our priority for the G20 would be focusing on inclusive, equitable, and sustainable growth. That is going to be our theme, really speaking. Because in India, what have we been doing for the past 8 years? We have been promoting an inclusive growth. When we talk of digital India, what are we talking about? We are providing equal opportunity for every citizen of the country to be part of the growth story. We are making sure that every citizen in the country is equally empowered. Not just the people living in the cities, not just the people who are getting education, but every citizen in the country is equally empowered. Only when he is empowered would he be able to be part of the growth story, and that is what we have done today. And that is how we believe we will be able to realize our sustainable development agenda. And the beauty in this initiative in India, what you call Digital India, is that today there are more people in the villages who are having access to internet than compared to even the urban areas. Now, what does it mean? The Ambassador Raul will be quite interested to hear. When we say our villages were connected to the internet, we opened up a whole new market of 600 million people who live in the villages. Before, they had to go to the cities to do the shopping. But today, the market has come to the homes. So sitting at home, they're able to order what they want. They're able to buy what they wish. They're able to decide what kind of fashion they wish to follow. They decide what kind of shows, TV, whatever it is they want to see. And you can imagine a 600 million market opening up suddenly, what kind of boom it has given to the economy in terms of manufacturing, in terms of products, in terms of the delivery chains, in terms of the logistics, etc., etc. It's a huge growth which it has given to India. And that is what we have been doing. And we believe that is a way for the whole world also to go forward, especially for the countries which are aspiring to realize an inclusive and sustainable growth. And naturally, it makes the growth equally sustainable because of the low cost. We believe after we introduce this Digital India, the cost of our transportation has gone down, because today you do not need to have people traveling all the way to the cities to get the services done. People do not need to go to the government offices to get the services done. But by sitting at home, they're able to get the services done. And also, it has increased the accountability of the government servants. Because today, by logging into the system and registering your request, now the civil servant is accountable to deliver. He has to deliver because he's got a track record. And the system shows when the request was filed and how many days it's taken to deliver. So it has increased the accountability of the government itself. It has made governance more responsible. It has made governance more responsive to the people. That is the beauty of this Digital India initiative today. And when this energy transition, which Professor Maria was referring to, and that is one of the important points, one of the important issues to be discussed under our G20 agenda also. Because it is a critical challenge. How do we realize our ambitions for energy transition? And this topic has acquired even more importance today in the post-energy security challenges posed by the Ukraine conflict. On one hand, the pandemic reminded us of the importance of conservation of the environment, etc. But on the other hand, the Ukraine conflict has pushed us back even more away from our aspirations for realizing the goal of environmental protection, sustainable mobility, etc. So we are in a very contradictory phase right now today, where countries are more concerned about providing energy and any form of energy, which is what is causing a lot of worry globally, that we are being put back by another decade or two, if you look at what is happening around us. And so that is going to be one important component of the discussions. Insofar as the renewable energy is concerned, in fact, for all of our friends across the region, I think today Brazil has a wonderful track record in renewable energy, certainly. It has the best energy mix amongst the G20 economies, no doubt on that. But when you look at the renewable energy, I think India is a success story. We not only made the announcement, but we are also following through with the announcements. Today, I think we have kept a target of releasing 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030. And that's going to be a lot of investment that is going to be seeing a lot of energy transition. And we are well on track towards achieving that. And we are not only going on track, but as we said, under that ISA, the International Solar Alliance, we're also expanding the reach. We are empowering other countries. We are sharing the knowledge, the technology, the financing. We are doing that with all the other countries also in partnership with the members of ISA, such as Brazil, Argentina, and others. On the Mercosur agreement, what I would say is that it's a fact, as Ambassador Raul mentioned. Today, I would urge our friends to study what is happening in India, because we signed a very successful agreement with UAE, under which we committed to expanding our trade to more than 100 billion non-oil trade, mind you. If you include oil, it will be $150 billion or something. But we said non-oil trade, we are going to increase it to more than $100 billion. And it is actually giving rewards today. I was just reading that last month, the two-way trade increased by another $5 billion or something, only in 1 month I'm talking about. And similarly, we signed an agreement with Australia. Now, Australia is very interesting and important for our friends in Latin America. I mean, especially I'm talking of the three. Because in a sense, it is a commodity-based economy, right? And in a sense, if you look at what is the strength, is also our strength. If you look at the dairy sector, for example, of Australia. Australia's got a very strong dairy sector. We also have a very strong dairy sector, right? But we decided, Australia was also very keen to tap into the large Indian market. And so we decided that, okay, the sensitive items, we will keep it for another day. Let's not miss out on the opportunities available today. And so we agreed to go forward. We concluded the discussions. And the interesting part in this agreements is that we concluded most of these agreements within 6 months, 8 months, most of these agreements. We did 3 agreements, one with Australia, one with Dubai, UAE, and one with Mauritius. With Mauritius, it's more of an investment agreement. But as Ambassador Raul mentioned, we are also actively having conversations with the UK. With UK, we have kept a target of concluding by end of October. Maybe, because of the change in government and things, maybe it may get delayed a little bit, but we both are committed to it. There is a very clear indication on both sides that we want to expedite the agreement. And similarly with Canada and also with the EU. In EU, we agreed in March to conclude the agreement by December next year. That too because of the fact that it's a much larger block and there are many different negotiating partners involved. And so we kept a slightly longer window, but we decided to make it happen. So in the case of Mercosur, we have proposed a slight revision to the agreement. We have proposed adding a few items, and we have proposed lowering the tariff on a few items. That document has already been submitted to the people concerned, and we are waiting for the feedback. But my point, frankly, here is that there is an information gap between the two sides. Okay. Number one, even Indian businessmen are thinking this is a bit far, that it's a bit difficult to come here and do business, etc. And also the fact that this has been also, many of the economies here are still traditionally closed economies, right? And so they feel that coming here and trying to do business here is a bit of a challenge. But now today, the Indian companies are feeling more confident. They feel they're big enough to handle the challenges. And so that is what I'm finding, that every day I'm finding Indian companies are willing to come here, not just open office, but they're willing to get into discussions about manufacturing. As I mentioned yesterday, I got a letter from one of our big Indian companies wanting to put up a big manufacturing unit in Brazil, which will cost about $750 million of investment. And last week, I got another company which said they're going to invest another $1 billion, all private sector, mind you. Plus, 3 other companies are already announced they're going to be putting up manufacturing units in Brazil. It is happening. I mean, countries are willing to come here, put up units and do the investment. And Paraguay is already becoming a preferred destination for our IT companies. Many of them are now actively looking at Paraguay in terms of investment. And I think it's worthwhile for Ambassador Raul, if I could suggest that you should look at taking a team to India, meeting our IT companies, talking to them, and encouraging them to come and open offices in Paraguay. Because as you say, money goes where it is welcomed. And sometimes it is useful to go and convey that message in person so that you also understand what is their expectation and thing. And our companies are quite active. I mean, across every single country in the region, I can tell you, they are investing today big time. Now, here what I feel, what we need to understand here is that, as Emmanuel was mentioning, I closely follow the IT space, the startup space, etc. There is a big gap which you countries can fill in, which is becoming the service provider for whole of Europe, for a lot of the Portuguese, Spanish-speaking countries, which is quite large in number, and it's quite a big market. Okay. In the case of English-speaking markets, naturally, I mean, Indian companies are quite strong, and it will be a bit of a challenge. But when you look at the overall size of the cake, it is quite big and quite large, and you will be able to achieve. You'll be able to scale up. You'll be able to supply to those markets when you reach out and get Indian companies to come here to open offices to start, sharing their expertise and knowledge. This is like going to a hospital. You can go to a general doctor for general stuff, but if you have a heart problem, you'll go to a cardiologist, right? And so here, if you want to expand, you must have the talent. You must have that expertise. And that is where you need to get the Indians to come and join the local IT firms to provide that expertise to expand, to take on the big contracts, the big projects, etc. Because there's a shortage of in-house talent. I mean, in the case of Brazil, there's more than 500,000 shortage of software engineers. And it is supposed to go up to 850,000 in under 2 years, 3 years. So how are you going to address that gap? And unless you address that gap, you'll not be able to expand your IT sector. That's a reality, right? So now comes the PSUs in energy. Yes, we signed a contract with the Petrobras, as I mentioned, for long-term purchase of crude, which will be about $1.3 billion to start with. But there are 3 other companies which are also holding conversations. So finally, it could go up to $4 or $5 billion eventually. We're also in discussions with them for the refining sector, for looking at third country investments, etc. So a lot of good discussions are happening in that space. I refer to cooperation in the software industry, which Emmanuel was also mentioning. And in the case of startups, I'm very happy to say that today many Indian startups are looking for partners in the region. And a lot of discussions are happening in that space also, and including from the venture capitals. There are some Indian venture capitals which are opening offices here and which are looking to look at investing in both early stage and developed startups because they find it to be an interesting opportunity for them also. On the BRICS, naturally, I mean, we are committed to BRICS. We are. It's an important platform. It's an important grouping, and it has had its fair share of success. If you look at the New Development Bank, I think it is one of the single biggest success stories in the post-World War II. Because if you look at traditionally, all the other institutions are Bretton Woods institutions are established by the North. But this is the first institution that has been established by the South, and which has proved to be a big success story, and which has also proved that the South can come together and establish institutions similar to the Bretton Woods institutions. So that way, the success of NDB has been really a role model. And not only that they have achieved much more success and much faster success than what comparable and similar development institutions have achieved. That is a very unique aspect of the NDB. So I must really congratulate them on the success. and also admire the vision of the leaders who came together and established BRICS and who announced the vision for establishing the NDB. Naturally, the discussions on the expansion is happening. It is happening because there's a recognition that there are more friends who are willing to join BRICS, and so the discussion is happening within inside. I'm not sure as to exactly what is the current status of the discussions, because now I'm here in my bilateral capacity and no longer directly involved with BRICS, but I'm sure it is going in the right direction. And I think our minister also had a good conversation with our friends in Argentina when he visited Buenos Aires, and also in Paraguay when he visited there. So they may be better placed to give the most recent development on that. On the IPSA right now, Brazil has taken over as a chairmanship, and we are looking at we just had the IPSA foreign ministers meeting. And I think Brazil is also looking at having an IPSA summit, maybe in Bali. I'm not sure. We need to see what is the thinking, about the summit. How do we look at the future, really speaking, between India and the region? I would say we're looking at, it's not, as I mentioned earlier, about a competition with any other country, because if you look at in terms of investments, naturally US, Europe are much larger investment partners for this region than, say, even China, when you look at overall numbers. And similarly, when you look at in terms of employment generation, US and Europe may be much larger employment providers. Similarly, in terms of developing your own economies, they may be much larger partners for you than China. So we're not here to compete with any of them. We are not competing with the US, we are not competing with China, we are not competing with Europe. We welcome all those partnerships. But in addition to that, we are only offering our hand, saying that, yes, today we are here, we are willing to, because we share the same values, it makes it more easier. And our companies are today large enough, big enough. By the way, for information, how many of you are aware that the world's biggest IT company is the TCS, the Tata Consultancy Services? They employ about 600,000 software engineers globally in 70 countries. If you look at Infosys or HCL, HCL is employing about 250,000 software engineers, again in 30-40 countries. Or you look at Infosys, similarly about 200,000 software engineers. These are all big firms. These are all big firms. Like if you look at, as I mentioned in Brazil, when I went to Londrina, Londrina is a beautiful city. It's called a Little London, actually. Londrina, the biggest private sector employer is TCS. When I went to Pindamonhangaba near Sao Paulo, the biggest employment provider is an Indian company called Novalis, which has a turnover of more than $2.5 billion. And that group, Aditya Birla Group, they have 5 factories in Brazil. And this is only one factory, which is $2.5 billion. As a group, they have like almost $4 billion turnover in Brazil. Or if you go to Minas Gerais, if you go to Belo, there's a company called SAE Towers, which is employing about 3,000 people. But if you look at Novalis, the direct employment is about 2,000 plus, but the indirect employment is more than 100,000 people across Brazil. That is the scale and thing. And we are looking at many more Indian companies which are actively present in Brazil and which are looking to expand and increase in Brazil. I mean, if you look at UPL, UPL is a very active partner in Brazil, in Argentina, in Paraguay. In Brazil alone, they have $2 billion worth of business. A company which started with nothing in about 6-7 years. In 7 years, they reached a scale of $2 billion. So that is the potential of Indian companies. And not only that, they are becoming a very critical partner for the agriculture sector, for the agronomy sector of the region, actually, of Paraguay, Argentina, and Brazil. They have become very critical partners. I mean, today, they are the 3rd biggest agrochemical industry in Brazil, if you look at it. So my point is that we are looking at the future. And the future is going to be a digital future. And that is where we can build a very strong partnership, number one. And number two, also in the manufacturing sector, today, Indian companies have become big enough, large enough, and they are willing to look at this market, this region, and they're now beginning to come here with a lot more confidence and a lot more ability to invest. And we need to reach out to them. We want your governments to go out and talk to the Indian companies and give them the confidence, saying, yes, We want you to come to a country, we welcome you, we will open the doors. And that is something which is very important because this region is still new to those companies and we need them to come here. I mean, if you look at in the case of the UK, I think Indian companies from India, okay, when I say UK, are perhaps the second biggest investor in the UK. I just told you about the IT companies in the US, where they added $300 billion to the American economy. So similarly, imagine if you attract them here and if you provide them the support systems, why not? You know, your software exports would also go by another $100 billion very easily. You have the talent, you have the potential, you just need to have the right partners. And that is what we are here for. Looking forward to working closely with you in making it happen. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for these remarks. We will now head to our next panel session with more perspectives on foreign policy. And our session moderator would be Sebastian Cutrona, who is the Associate Professor at Jindal School of International Affairs and also the Fellow at CALAX as well. So over to you, Sebastian, to take over the bastion for the next panel session. Thank you very much, all the panelists and Ambassador, for your perspectives.
Thank you, Umesh. Thank you so much for the introduction. This second part of the webinar is going to revolve around the future directions for India and Latin America. We have 3 panelists, and then we have the closing remarks in charge of the CARI's Vice President, Francisco Santibáñez. First, we're going to have Lía Rodríguez from the CARI, the researcher and professor at the Argentinian Council of Foreign Relations. And then we're going to have Guillermo Casaroes, professor from the Getulio Vargas Foundation. And finally, is going to be presenting on the relationships between India and Latin America, Gustavo Rojas, program officers from the United Nations in Paraguay. We're kindly requesting our panelists to stick to the 5 minutes. Apologies, but we are a bit behind the original agenda. And we're opening now the floor to Lía Rodríguez. She's going to be talking about India's relations with Latin America. And in particular, we are requesting Lía to talk about the opportunities for cooperation and how to promote them. Lía, over to you. Lía, I think you're muted.
Yeah, ready. Sorry. Thank you very much to all the colleagues. I think it's a fantastic event and it's fantastic to have the opportunity to change ideas. So if we must comment on specific data about the relationship between Latin America and the Caribbean and India, we can consider data that are always mentioned as, for example, the number of diplomatic representation of India in Latin America and Latin America in India that have been increasing, as Ambassador already mentioned. We have specific initiatives as, for example, the Focus Project from India to Latin America and all that, the coincidence we have in different multilateral forums, the cooperation between southern countries that it's also encouraged between both of them. But if we must consider the future, in addition to the strength and scope of soft power, which is growing and position itself in a profound way in the relationship between India and Latin America and in general, I want to draw attention today to the need to generate and better organize and articulate epistemic communities, or what would be the same, knowledge networks, referring to different social actors with experience and competence on the issues to be analyzed in the bilateral relations we consider. When we talk about epistemic communities, they vary according to the scale of the problem that we are trying to solve. So the confirmation challenge our understanding of the relationship, but also invite us to include a plurality of political actors with different administrative attributions and ideological orientations. So we can think about academicians, people with position at the governments, enterprises and the representatives and the civil society in general. but I would like to add here the Indian diaspora that we have in Latin America in short numbers, but with a lot of experience in our region, and they can really collaborate with us, giving ideas and especially giving us experience in a kind of historical dialogue between India and Latin America in general. The dialogue in an epistemic community, which is established, is aimed primarily at generating consensus to define and share the cognitive frameworks with which our members of this epistemic community perceive the problems in the relationship and the alternatives we can give, we can think together to solve them. At this point, it's important to make a clarification about these frames of meaning. These are not constrained to a merely interpretative aspects of reality, but also have a pragmatic substrate that guides practices and allows formulating actions and action plans to modify the reality. So the representation we have of our relationship makes possible to think better action-oriented. The information, which is very important, that circulates among us in an epistemic community is also a key factor in our relationship. So I would like to invite us to have this on mind and also consider a specific dimension that in general is always overlooked, that is the linguistic diversity we have in our countries. We usually solve that diversity by speaking in English. However, I want to draw attention to the need to have at least a basic knowledge of the language, or at least one language of the countries with which we interact, in order to access their symbolic universe. That is, the number of things that are not then explicitly expressed, but make our customs, our values, our social practices, our business culture absolutely relevant when establishing lasting relationships. The cultural diversity of India, and of course, the cultural diversity of Latin America, offers us an opportunity to also emphasize diversity as a resource of the relationship rather than a problem to be solved in the same relationship. And finally, in this direction, I would like to say thank you very much to my colleagues. Obrigado, muchas gracias, for the possibility to share and co-organize this fantastic event and continue the brainstorm about India and Latin America relations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah. Thank you so much for your presentation. Now we are moving to the second panelist in this second part of the webinar. We are now leaving the floor to Guillermo Casaroes, professor again from the Getulio Vargas Foundation. Guillermo, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm very happy to be here. I'm thrilled to see some familiar faces such as Gustavo Rojas, who's a good old friend of mine, who's now in Paraguay. And of course, some other friends, Umesh, who's probably two floors up here. I can see from your shelf. So Ambassador Suresh Reddy, thank you so much for this opportunity. I mean, it's exciting to be able to discuss such an important aspect of the future of the world, right? India, Latin America relationship, or India-Brazil relations more particularly, are key in reshaping the world order, or at least in trying to imagine a future where we have many different poles of power that can cooperate, that can interact with one another. Karin Vasquez, thank you so much for the opportunity too. And of course, as two Brazilians, I think we have a lot to discuss in the future, thinking about the possibility for cooperation between Brazil and India. I'd like to start by pointing out something that Leah has also said in her talk. India and Brazil, in particular, are very similar countries in many different respects. This is something that the ambassador has also mentioned. We are strategic partners ever since 2006. We are two of the world's largest, most vibrant, and most plural democracies, and this is also very important. Earlier today in India, I gave a lecture on Brazilian elections, and one of the things that I highlighted is that Brazil and India are so similar when it comes to its democratic challenges as well. I mean, these are very prosperous and diverse countries that share some of the challenges too. And I also like to point out that Brazil and India share this long-standing multilateral engagement perspective. I mean, both countries, they have invested a lot in their multilateral agendas. India, one time back in the Cold War days, would love to be the voice of the voiceless in the world. And I think that Brazil shares the same perspective of somehow speak on behalf of the developing world. And that really makes India and Brazil very likely to cooperate in so many different ways. I'm not sure if my colleagues know it, but Brazil and India are, by the way, India is the only country that is part of every single mini-lateral coalition that Brazil is a part of in global terms. So the BRICS, the basic alliance on the environment, the G20, both trade and financial, the G4 group of Security Council reform, the IBSA group. So that pretty much makes India the most obvious partner of Brazil outside of Latin America. And of course, we are yet to make a decisive investment in making India a true strategic partner. I think, of course, it's a two-way street. India is also yet to see Brazil as a key ally in constructing the future world order. But I think that both countries are getting there. Both countries are developing a growing interest in one another. Of course, it's not easy to envision a cooperation between Brazil and India because these two countries are very similar on the one hand, but they are too far apart on the other hand. They are very distant from each other, and they go through very different regional circumstances. And their position in the world is changing. I'd say that 20 years ago, when President Lula and Prime Minister Manmohan Singh were constructing this partnership between Brazil and India, these two countries' positions was relatively different at the time. Brazil was emerging, India was emerging. They were pretty much on the same stage of economic development. India has been able to keep moving forward, which is great news for the country. Brazil has been lagging behind for many different reasons. We were struck by recession as of 2013. We've shrunk, our economy has shrunk by 7% between 2015 and 2016. Terrible news for Brazil. And now we're going through some other challenges that have to do with the whole context. So this is why I think it's not easy to think of this cooperation as a strategic part of their foreign policies, but I also think it's worth having a look into the possibilities and the perspectives of it. The challenges, the more specific challenges, to be very brief, are number one, at least in my view as a political scientist, both countries, they have to overcome inequality and promote growth at home. And of course, this makes up for room for cooperation in economic agendas. Another big challenge is related to growing food insecurity around the world. And I think that the war in Ukraine has really exposed the degree of insecurity that we might go into thanks to a war, for example, in a place in the world that was key for some grain production, as in the case of Russia and Ukraine. So I think that there's a challenge when it comes to food insecurity that both countries have to deal with, albeit in different ways. There's also a changing regional and global context. And this changing regional and global context that we see, especially from mid-decade, mid-2010s up until right now, has to do with the massive and very quick growth of China in world politics. Now we have more of a bipolar setting in the world, unlike 20 years ago when you had a multipolar structure. And now I think that both Brazil and India will have to very carefully think about how to deal with China. What will be the future context of China-India relations and Brazil-China relations? And of course, the potential for India-Brazil cooperation also has to do with the role that both countries will play vis-a-vis China. So this is also something that I think we have to consider. China is not an enemy of neither Brazil and India, but China might be an important counterpoint to the initiatives of India and Brazil's foreign policy. So that's why maybe it will be an opportunity to join forces in this realm as well. And of course, another challenge, finally, is the long-term impacts of climate change that will affect both Brazil and India in different ways. But I think it's important for both countries to start cooperating in this regard. I mean, we already do, but making even greater efforts to this end. And of course, to every challenge, there is an opportunity. So when it comes to overcoming inequality and promoting growth, I think that Brazil has a lot to learn, as Ambassador Reddy said, from India's digital turn. And this is something that I've been discussing very much with my political scientist colleagues, or even with politicians who are poised to win the election right now. I've insisted in transforming Brazil's industrial base in a digital industrial base. I mean, we have to go through the Industry 4.0 transformations. And this is not something that we have been thinking a lot about. Another area for cooperation, another opportunity, is environmental cooperation. Of course, India and Brazil have very different challenges ahead, but I think that when it comes to biofuels, when it comes to renewable energies, when it comes to the protection of some global environmental goods, both Brazil and India have a lot to cooperate with one another. And finally, and that's my final point, I really think that Brazil and India should invest in the upcoming years in the development human rights nexus. In the international relations literature, we talk a lot about development security nexus. So there's an assumption going around that if a region of the world is underdeveloped, most conflicts might arise. But I think that we should change the focus a little bit and not think too much about conflicts, but think about human rights. In underdeveloped parts of the world and in underdeveloped parts of our own countries, human rights issues become more salient and more critical. And this is why I think that because Brazil and India are such big countries, but such unequal countries, it's important for both to start thinking about development as a key element of their human rights agenda. And I'm pretty sure that Brazil and India have a lot to cooperate in this area as well. So I expect to hear your thoughts about this, and thank you so much for the opportunity again.
Thank you so much, Guilherme, for your presentation. I'm going to reiterate, apologies for being repetitive, that we are a little bit behind the agenda. So I'm requesting Gustavo Rojas, Program Officer from the United Nations in Paraguay, to try to close his presentation in 5 minutes. I know that CARI's Vice President has a commitment. So I'm requesting again the final panelist to try to present his views and ideas in 5 minutes. Thank you so much. Gustavo Rojas, the floor is yours.
Good morning, colleagues from Jindal Global University, CARI, and FGV. Thank you so much for this special invitation. As UNICEF officer in Paraguay and a scholar of international relations, it's an honor to share this interesting multinational and pluralistic space for debate the present and the future of India and Latin America relations. The colleagues who precede me have already presented us with a broad and complete diagnosis of Indo-Latin America relations. India is today the 5th largest economy in the world, and if its recent annual growth rate of 6.7 over the last 4 years is maintained, it should become the 30th largest global economy in the next decade. Based on my personal views, which do not necessarily reflect the views of the United Nations, I would like to draw your attention to some possibilities for action with significant potential for deepening ties between India and Latin America around 3 points: trade, finance, and Sustainable Development Goals, G20, and South-South cooperation. First, trade. After listening to the previous presentation, it is clear that the trade agreements currently linking the two regions are limited and narrow in their levels of tariff preferences and in their basket of products. But these agreements also have a limited agenda of disciplines. Considering the ongoing negotiations between Mercosur and India, it would be very important to significantly and progressively expand the universe of products and the level of tariff preference granted mutually. The limited supply of Indo-South Atlantic shipping routes is a crucial limitation that should be discussed and analyzed in particular. Consideration could be given to including in this future agreement a multi-sectoral package of trade facilitation agreements, goods, services, and investments, incorporating into these bilateral agreements some of the innovative agendas that both parties have already promoting at the multilateral level in the WTO. The creation of specific chapters of the treatment of no-tariff measures, local currency payments systems, and technical cooperation in agriculture could be an innovative measure for expanding these flows in a sustainable way. South-South cooperation between Mercosur and India and the coordination between both parties at the multilateral level may be fundamental for the discussions of the future of multilateral trade system, South-South trade, and particularly the understanding of the right to special and differential treatment between and for developing countries. In this regard, and in the current context of crisis of the multilateral system, it would be strategic to relaunch the global system of trade preference among developing countries, also known as GSTP, by means of the entry into force of its latest protocol. The São Paulo Round Protocol will be entered into force after ratification by at least 4 of its 8 signatories. To date, the protocol has been ratified by India, Malaysia, and Cuba. One additional ratification will bring it into force. 2 of the 4 Mercosur members, Argentina and Uruguay, have completed their ratifications. Brazil and Paraguay must ratify the protocol to complete Mercosur's ratification. Finally, the United States is home of a very significant number of Latin American and Indian companies and entrepreneurs. Holding meetings between Indo-Latin business communities in United States could be an interesting initiative. My second point is finance. In the last decade, with the creation and expansion of membership of the new Development Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, members of Indian and Latin American economic team are meeting with increasing frequency in this space. It would be very interesting to be able to structure a greater number of financing operations that seek to expand the partnership between companies from both regions, generating bi-regional productive linkages, particularly in high value-added sectors where India already has an outstanding and valued presence in the region, such as automotive, auto parts, medicines and vaccines, metallurgy, renewable energy, and information services. Mercosur's regional automotive agreement currently under negotiation and select sanitary self-sufficiency plan approved this year offer interesting regulatory frameworks for considering the construction of an Indo-Latin America productive integration strategy. Likewise, a greater bilateral, multilateral dialogue between India's Exim Bank and Latin American public banks would be very important with a view to setting up agile and under-bureaucracy joint financing lines. Finally, India is the only major Asian economy that is not yet a member of the Inter-American Development Bank. The current new context of this institution could be an interesting opportunity for India's entry. 30, and finally, Sustainable Development Goals, G20, and South-South cooperation. The pandemic has been a major obstacle to the achievement of SDG worldwide, particularly in developing countries. The fact that in the next 3 years, we'll have respectively the G20 under the chairmanship of the representative countries from the Global South, respectively India, Brazil, and Southern Africa, open a unique opportunity to redesign global recovery based on the promotion of a global economic agenda with a human face, centered on solidarity around the particular challenges of Global South. The pandemic has posed a major challenge to the development of a system for registering beneficiaries for government subsidies for low-income people. Both India and Latin America have developed interesting digital innovations for building solutions that deserve to be better studied and exchanged between the two sides. Unfortunately, the world will continue to be marked by pandemic and catastrophes. So the development of such solutions will have to be a constant. As already mentioned, Latin America is the main beneficiary of India UN Development Partnership Fund, with 26 projects totalizing $19 million, a clear demonstration of India's solidarity with the developing world. In my country, Paraguay, interesting projects have been developed around the prevention of sexual violence and adolescent pregnancy, a problem common to both Paraguay and India. In Paraguay and in the region, we seek to extend Indian solidarity to other emerging issues that constitute common social challenges: water and sanitation, climate change, and continuity of children's education. The solutions developed by the fund can be an interesting input for the scalability of solutions to be proposed by the future Indian presidents of the G20. In the same view, IPSA, which brings together 3 large developing democracies with similar challenges around the development and cooperation agenda, should be revitalized and updated, with renewed emphasis on key issues such as food, energy, and health security. The relaunching of the IBAS Fund may be an important initiative to make these actions feasible. In addition, reflection on the geostrategic relationship between South Atlantic and Indian Ocean in the dimensions of peace, security, and cooperation and trade should be stimulated. I hope that these reflections have motivated you to continue promoting this promising relationship between India and Latin America, a reality of growing importance for the future of the people of both regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Gustavo, for your presentation. Thank you to the 3 panelists for your presentations today. We originally reserved a time slot for questions. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we will not be able to raise questions during this last part of the webinar. We're going to forward the questions to the panelists. We have questions from several newspapers and I guess the audience as well. But now we're going to go straight to the final remarks. Thank you so much to Francisco Santibáñez, CARI's Vice President, who is going to take the floor now to conclude and finalize this webinar. Thank you, Francisco. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to congratulate everyone who has participated of this dialogue. I think it was very insightful. We have all learned a lot. I would like to thank especially to Karin Vasquez, Umesh Muki, Ilia de la Vega. I think this is the beginning of a partnership between our institutions. And I wanted just to provide a couple of comments from the perspective of Latin America. No, there is no doubt that we are facing many challenges now in Latin America: lack of economic growth, the social, economic, and political effect of the pandemic, the fact that after a long time we're part of a global conflict. We're starting to see the difficult choices we have to make when we have two big powers like the US and China in a strategic rivalry that also includes mainly South America. But there are also, I think, many opportunities. Some of them have been mentioned throughout the discussions today. We again have a great opportunity as provided of food, energy. We are seeing that, for instance, in the case of European Union, now facing difficulties in the conflict with Russia. Latin America becomes again a strategic region where trade, exchange, economic exchange is possible. But we also have a vibrant IT community, both in terms of private business and public companies, state companies. And my final points would be that for those opportunities to be possible, to avoid some of the challenges I mentioned, collaboration with countries such as India is vital for us. I think there is a consensus about that. The importance of multilateralism, of having stable, clear rules that run international order. There is a profound agreement with India about that too. And of course, defending this position in international organizations, but also at a bilateral level. There's a great opportunity in terms of economic exchanges and political agreement. And finally, I think there is a possibility of a knowledge network, such as was mentioned before, no? That it needs to involve the governments, but also the institutions in the academic work and the think tanks. We have to get to know each other better, and it will be impossible to know better also the role that India is starting to play in our region, that I think it will be increasingly important. So thank you very much. I think this is the beginning of a relationship of future events. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francisco. I guess we have finished today. Karin, I don't know if you want to say the final words. We are done, a little bit behind the schedule, but it has been a great pleasure. Karin, over to you.
Just simply to thank all the participants on behalf of JGU and just say that we achieved the goal of this event to offer this platform for exchange of perspectives on how to develop our relations. We laid out clear opportunities that we have ahead of us now and also in the future in building development futures. And again, to reinforce the messages with her to grow this platform into a community, into a reference group. We need now to organize networks around issues we are trying to solve and advance collaboration amongst our countries. And here's possibly a request for Ambassador Suresh to continue hosting dialogues with Brazilian academics, not only to spread awareness and further build this community, but also other ambassadors in Paraguay and Argentina and other countries of our region to do the same, to further build this community. And JGU, FGV, I'm sure, and Kadi also are ready to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Congrats.